Good evening. We live on two different planes of consciousness, and many of the conflicts that come into our experience come in because we live sometimes in on one plane and sometimes on another, and often these planes conflict with each other. And even when we live on the one plane, if we do not rightly understand it, we set up the conflicts within ourselves that result in what we call punishment to ourselves. On one plane, we are mental beings with bodies. That is, we are a mind and a body. And the body is governed by the mind. It can be governed by the conscious activity of mind, or it can be governed by a subconscious activity of mind. You undoubtedly have noticed, since I've drawn your attention to the fact of these experiments that are being made with subliminal perception, that is, the broadcasting over television of advertising which you never see or hear. It is not aimed at your conscious mind, it is aimed at the subconscious, and you do not have to see it or hear it. You have no knowledge that it's even taking place. And yet, if you're not alert, you will obey it. In the first experiments, which were held inside of a moving picture theater, the people were told to go downstairs and buy popcorn and Coca-Cola. Made no difference whether they wanted it or not. They had to go and buy it, and they did. They gave their good money for something they didn't want, had no use for, and wouldn't otherwise have bought. But the action on their mind was so strong, even though they didn't know it was there, that they had to obey it. Now, they have been continuing these experiments. The last one was performed over television into private homes, and those who were running it told the people to go to the telephone. Now, of course, they had no reason to go. The bell wasn't ringing, and they had no message because they were watching a television show. And they haven't yet published the results of how many did go to the telephone, for no reason at all except that they had been directed without seeing or hearing the message, yet obeyed. Last week they began a new series of these experiments in the schools. They're going to save this next generation the trouble of studying. And so they're going to arrange to have the lessons on tape and play them while the children are asleep. And they'll just wake up in the morning and they'll know how to speak German, French, Italian, Spanish, They'll know mathematics, science, and everything else. And they won't have to think, and they won't have to study. They won't even have to know whether it's true or not. But if somebody pumped it into them when they were asleep, they will accept it. Now this shows the extent to which our bodies obey the dictates of the mind. And on this human level, that is exactly what happens. The body is subject to the mind. Now, on this same level, there are certain laws. They're mental laws, and yet, if we violate them, we get punished. The Ten Commandments are some of those mental laws. And it is surprising that actually very few people can escape ultimate penalty for violation of those Ten Commandments. Even those that are just purely mental, like not envying, not being jealous, not desiring the other person's property. Just violating those mental urges brings punishment. That is called the law of cause and effect. There are things that people in the South Seas, in the South Sea Islands, can do with freedom and joy and happiness and peace, because under their laws they're right, which if we did, we would suffer severe penalties for, because under our laws they're wrong. Yet they're the same deeds, the same acts, the same thoughts. Yet they act differently. The reason is that they act in response to a law. And any law which we accept and then violate brings its punishment to us. That is why the Master gave us what we now know to be cosmic law, which the Hindus call karma, the law of cause and effect. As ye sow, so shall ye reap. As ye do to others, so will it be done unto you. All of this is because we as humans live on a mental plane, and even the body is subject unto this mental control. Now, there is another plane of consciousness, and Jesus spoke of this one in several different ways. For one thing, he spoke of it by saying that this kingdom, my kingdom, is not of this world, that mental and physical world. He also said, my peace give I unto you, not as the world giveth. Not as the world giveth. There's a different type of peace than can be known with a mind or body. And that was the my peace that belonged to this kingdom, which is not of this world. It's an entirely different realm of consciousness. And in that higher consciousness, there are no laws. There is no cause and no effect. There is only being. There is neither good nor evil, up nor down. There is just being. Strangely enough, when this my kingdom or my peace can be brought into even our mind, it nullifies the law and takes us out from under it and removes the penalties for the transgressions, because it removes the transgressions along with it. Every illness in the world comes to us as a result of the violation of some law on the human plane, mental or physical. If there were no violation of a law, there would be no discord, no disease, no sin. There's always a law of some kind being violated, like sitting in a draft and catching cold, getting the feet wet and catching cold, getting a germ and getting a disease. These are mental laws which have been laid down, and like subliminal perception, you don't even have to know there is such a law, and yet you come under it. You don't even have to know that there's an infection or contagion around you, and you come under it. You don't have to know about any of the laws, and yet your violation of them results in a penalty for them. Now, it is for this reason that churches make the appeal that they do for people to obey the Ten Commandments, so as not to bring on themselves punishment for the infraction of law. And you might believe by that if you were obedient to the Ten Commandments, that you would never suffer. That is not so, because those are only 10 commandments that you know about, but there are a million others that aren't written, that you know nothing about, yet when you violate them, the penalty is yours. A newly born child may know nothing of the law of getting in drafts, but if it gets in a draft, it's apt to catch cold. It is not violating the law consciously. It is not stealing, lying, defrauding, cheating, envying, committing theft, adultery, murder, but it pays all the penalties as if it were. Because you do not have to know that there is a law, and you do not have to know that you are violating it in order to come under its penalty. All of the error of this human world is just as invisible and universal as the subliminal perception, and operates in the same manner. It operates without your conscious awareness of it. Now that makes victims of everybody on the face of the globe. And as a matter of fact, everybody born into this world is a victim of all of these hidden laws and hidden beliefs. You here, of course, know how the activity of the good kahuna and the bad kahuna works. And you know that it works primarily because the individual has been made aware of the penalty of this kahunaism and lives in fear of it, and then comes under the law and suffers from it. Now that is not common to Hawaii. That exists in other places. The Aborigines of Australia have the same thing, only they call it witchcraft and black magic. And whereas the kahuna here might do it with a piece of fingernail or a hair, the black magic witch of the Aborigines does it by pointing. He either points his finger in the direction of the victim, or he points a sharp-pointed piece of wood. And the moment he does that, his victim becomes ill and within a couple of days dies. Why? Not because there is any power in kahunaism, not because there is any power in the witchcraft, because there is power in fear. There is power in the fear of mind, or there is power in the fear of matter. So it is that from the moment a person is conceived almost, somebody is filling their consciousness with fear. And then the very moment that anything happens out in this world, their own fear makes them a victim of it. And that is how sin and disease operates in the world. It operates in the same way that kahunaism does. It operates by suggestion. You don't even have to know that the suggestion is being made. You only have to have a fear of the thoughts and things of the evil world. Now, that brought to light a principle on which metaphysical healing was originally started. And that is the principle of truth dispelling error, or truth dispelling ignorance, or truth over error. Now just think, if these evil thoughts in mind had an effect on body, how much more so should good thoughts have an effect on body? And so a new religion sprung up, virtually the religion of right thinking, or the religion called truth, capital T-R-U-T-H. And there are many forms of that in the world. Now the idea of it is this. Under ordinary circumstances, the human race is a victim of whatever beliefs are circulating in consciousness. So that if a flu germ starts over in Asia somewhere, it soon spreads all around the world. And if one disease starts somewhere, it follows all around the world, because wherever there are people to think, there are people to fear. Wherever there are people to fear, there are people to accept the result of thought. Now, if this is true, how much more so should it be true that truth should have an effect upon the body? And so came these truth teachings, in which the individual filled their consciousness with truth, and this truth acted on the body. Well, it was found to be very effective. It was found to be very remedial. And not only these truth movements grew up out of it, but Finally, psychosomatic medicine came, which is founded on these very principles. And then came the practice of psychological healing, all of which is changing one's base from a negative thinking to positive thinking, or filling consciousness with truth as against having it filled with erroneous beliefs and theories. Out of this has evolved the following. Your mind, imbued with error, wrong thinking, negative thinking, produces a negative condition of body, or a pocketbook, or a family life. Your mind, imbued with truth, results in a healthy body, or healthy purse, or healthy family life. In other words, it is a question now of decision, whether one is going to wake up in the morning and accept every thought or any thought that comes to them, or whether they are going to take a positive stand to reject the negative and accept only the positive. Now, every step of this has been a step in the right direction, because it has been a step out of leaving one's mind a blank for the world to act upon. In other words, I don't think you're going to find many metaphysicians or truth students become victims of this so-called new advertising, or even of the new method of teaching in schools. If a person has a mind which they are not using actively, that is, a mind which merely accepts everything that is given to it orally or invisibly, that mind can be acted upon and made to follow the line of the imposed thought, the suggested thought. The individual who has determined that they will do their own thinking and benefit only by what they themselves accept has started on a new path. And then these world beliefs become less prevalent in their experience. In other words, checking in schools in the eastern states, we find that children of homes where they have the truth teachings, Christian Science of Unity, are absent for sickness only 20% of the time of any other student in the entire school. In every way you find that these people, regardless of which truth teaching they take, are less victims of this universal mesmerism than the world itself, and are less affected by the conditions of the world. And so it is for this reason that everyone has to, in the first stages of their study, everyone has to awaken in the morning and take hold of their own mind. That is, begin to realize that nothing can enter my mind from without, but that my mind is an instrument through which I function, not through which the world functions, not through which you function, not through which somebody else functions, but my mind is an instrument through which I function. My mind is an instrument given to me just as my body is given to me. And just as I keep my body unto myself, so I keep my mind unto myself, and do not permit my mind to be used by suggestion, by outside influences, outside opinions or theories. I make my mind an instrument for truth or God. But this must be done consciously. This cannot be done through a faith that God will take care of me. It is very much like just before leaving on this last trip, I received a letter from a woman asking for help for her husband who was dying in a hospital. And she ended her letter by saying, "Oh, I am sure that God will save my husband." So I wrote back to her and said, "What makes you so positive that God will save your husband? What is there about your husband that is so special that God should go out of his way to save him and let all the other people in the world die or pass on? Why will there be many, many deaths and your husband escape it? And God is going to help your husband escape it. Why? What has your husband done to deserve this? What have you done? What makes you so confident that God, or are you any different than all the other wives with husbands dying who also feel that God will make an exception and save their husbands? Now tell me, why should anyone feel that God is going to make an exception and save their husband or wife or child or parent? Why? And the answer is, if you're intelligent, it isn't. It isn't. If we are to be saved from these world influences, mesmeric influences like disease and death, it isn't going to be a God that's going to save us from them. It is because we refuse to let our minds be acted upon by these world beliefs and hold our mind open only to God. If you abide in this word and let this word abide in you, you will bear fruit richly. If you dwell, live, move, have your being in the secret place of the Most High, none of these evils will come nigh your dwelling place. Now, there isn't a God somewhere that you can say, "Oh, I can rest because none of these things are going to happen to me." They aren't going to happen to you if you are in obedience to the principle of keeping consciousness filled with truth. If you are shutting out the world beliefs as power and realizing that the only power operating within you is the power of truth, whether or not you consciously know a specific truth, isn't it? But whether or not you know that truth operating in consciousness is power and that nothing else is. You see, even among some of our students, there is too much superstition, far too much of blind faith that there's some kind of a God that does something for metaphysical students that it doesn't do for other students. And that's a fatal belief. God is God, and God is no respecter of persons. God is as available to white or black or Jew or Gentile. God is as available to anyone on the face of the globe who makes themselves consciously one with God. It has nothing to do with God. God is no respecter of persons. God doesn't pick out the good people to reward and the bad people to punish. God's rain falls on the just and the unjust. The question is whether an individual recognizes that they are living as human beings, they are living in a world where this subliminal perception has been going on for generations. This suggestive therapy, this hypnotism, and that it goes on unknown to you as individuals, yet operative in your consciousness through what now the psychologists call the subconscious. This we have learned, and we have 75 to 80 years of proof of this, that you can avoid 90% of the world's errors in proportion as you can take hold of yourself and consciously know the truth. Consciously recognize no power but one, and that power not external to you, operating upon you, but within you, operating outward from you. This room, at this very minute, is filled with all of the error that exists anywhere in the world. This room, at this very moment, is filled with the atmosphere of death, disease, accident, sin, false appetite. It's not only flowing in from radios, televisions, it's flowing in just through the world consciousness. Now then, not knowing this, one may become a victim of it in one form or another. Knowing it, one may protect themselves. Watch what happens in your experience when you learn to awaken in the morning and absolutely bar from yourselves the possibility of the world thought entering you and operating in your experience. Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. 1,000 shall fall at your left hand, and 10,000 at your right hand, but it shall not come nigh you who dwell in this truth. Now just remember this, that, and this is no new thing, this has been going on ever since there is recorded history. There have been wars and rumors of wars and threats of wars. There have been plagues, droughts, floods, storms. And yet Scripture says none of these things shall come nigh thy dwelling place. This either must be true or Scripture should really be ruled out. But it is true, and it has been proven true these last 75 to 80 years, that anyone who is willing to go to the trouble of giving a few minutes of their time every day to the recognition that these world thoughts exist but not as power, and that they can find no entrance into my consciousness, since my consciousness is truth itself expressing itself, and that all power flows out from within me to this world, the power of good or God, and that none of these human theories, beliefs, laws, hypnotic suggestions can enter to defile or make a lie. The government made use of some of this principle in the last war, when it was found that the Germans were hypnotizing flyers or crews of airplanes that they captured, hypnotizing them and then getting information from them. And they taught flyers after that when they were being interrogated, just to keep one thing in their mind: 2 times 2 or 4. 2 times 2 or 4. And regardless of what is asked of you or what suggestion is made to you, keep in mind that 2 times 2 or 4, and you cannot be hypnotized. As long as you have a truth in your consciousness, you cannot be made to accept a lie. And hypnotism is not truth. Now, it is in the same way. If you learn to abide in spiritual truth and learn to apply it to every experience of daily living, you will nullify the negative thoughts and things that come at the world through this universal mesmerism that's operating. Now, just think that even though the radio in this room is not turned on, we can't hear it, just think that it's operating in this room. Just think of all the other things that are operating in this room that we can neither hear nor see. And then wonder why you go out of some buildings feeling jumpy and nervous, go out of other buildings feeling calm and at peace. Just walk into a church where there is a dedicated minister, or rabbi, or priest, one with their heart and soul in their ministry, and see if you do not quickly lose all of the nervousness and tension and fear and doubt and settle into an atmosphere of an inner peace. Why? Because that temple, church, synagogue, mosque, whatever it is, has been kept through that minister with a pure atmosphere. So it is. When you maintain your mind as a temple of God and are willing to let nothing enter your mind except that which comes from God, you too will find that you're living in an inner peace. Now, all of this is in the realm of our human experience. But we become the determining factors as to whether that human experience will be harmonious or inharmonious, whether it will be successful or unsuccessful, whether it will be good or whether it will be evil. And we determine that by the degree of our devotion to the practices, that is, the willingness to take some part of every hour to remind ourselves that we are not victims of whatever it is that's floating around in the air, whether thoughts or things, but that we are the outlets for the presence and power of God, that our mind is the temple of God, just as the body is the temple of God. And then we determine for ourselves a more harmonious existence. Now, very many people believe that they themselves are negative, or that they themselves are evil, or that they themselves are responsible for not doing the things they should do. Even Paul accused himself. The things that I would, I do not, and the things I would not, that I do. As if he himself were responsible for that. He wasn't. Everyone on the human plane is acting and reacting in accord with some suggestion that's being pumped into them from this universal belief. And the only way to avoid it is to learn how it's done. And this is the way it's done. An individual has to first of all catch some perception, some realization of the fact that we are antennas, humanly, and that we catch each other's thoughts and moods and dispositions, that we react to each other's feelings, that we react to world feelings, that we even react to world tensions, that when the rest of the country is fearing something, we will fear something, so forth and so on. Once we recognize that, we can begin to change it, not before. If a person cannot become convinced that there are unseen forces governing their human experience, they of course will not waste 5 minutes' time trying to avoid it. But once you become convinced that there are many things you do that you would not do, and that you don't do really because of you wanting to, once you become convinced that you think certain thoughts which are not your nature, they must have been imposed upon you from outside, because they don't correspond to what your own nature and character is, then you'll begin to perceive that out here is this universal mesmerism. And then you'll be willing to separate yourself from it. And there is one way. And that one way is when you begin consciously to realize that this universal mesmerism is not a power that can enter my consciousness. It only acts as a power in my ignorance of it. But now that I know it's there, I no longer respond to it. I no longer receive it. I no longer react to it, for I and my Father are one, and all that the Father is flows through me, for I am the temple of the living God. Now watch that change when you make yourself consciously one with God, when you open yourself and make yourself a state of receptivity to anything and everything that flows from the kingdom of God within, and shut yourself off consciously from the world's mesmeric influence. You see, the higher dimension, that which the Master spoke of as my kingdom, is not available to the human being, is not available to the person who is still under that world mesmerism. It is only as that world mesmerism lifts and we can become as conscious of God operating in us as heretofore we were conscious of fears, doubts, suspicions, hate, envy, jealousy. Only then do we become susceptible to the operation and the activity of the kingdom of God. Those who know this truth and learn meditation are in a position, having nullified from their experience the operation and activity of this universal hypnotism, they now are able to sit back and say, "Speak, Lord, thy servant heareth," and gradually to develop an inner awareness or contact, and the still small voice then becomes the bread, the wine, the water, the life of individual being. It is folly for a human being who has not cleared themselves of this universal sense, personal sense, to think that just by closing their eyes they're going to hear the still small voice. It is folly for the person who is still indulging hate, envy, jealousy, malice, all these things, to believe that they can sit down and close their eyes and immediately God will be on the scene to protect them. It isn't so. It isn't so. The things of God are foolishness with man, the things of man are foolishness with God, and the two really never come together until man has separated himself from the very influences that originally separated him from God. We are only separated from God for one reason. The mind came in between to fill itself with our personal thoughts or world thoughts, selfish thoughts. And since this is true, the God thoughts can't get through. If they did, we wouldn't hear them, because they're usually telling us to do something unselfish, something foreign to our human nature, and we wouldn't hear it if it spoke. So I say this to you. Don't be like this woman who just blindly believes God is going to save her husband, not all the rest of the people's husbands, just hers. Don't believe that. We can be saved, and we can save each other. We can help each other over many and many and many a hard place. But we can only do it in proportion as we are no longer being used by this personal sense, used by this universal hypnotism, so that our minds, thoughts, and even bodies are filled with these world beliefs instead of being emptied of them and receptive and responsive to that still small voice that is within us. Now, after a while, and I say this to you honestly, that it takes months before we can separate ourselves from these universal beliefs. From the start, we begin, within a few days, we begin to be less receptive or responsive to some of these world urges, but it really takes months of consecration before you can see the definite effect that whereas the world is fearing this, you don't feel it anymore. Whereas formerly certain things roused in you anger, resentment, rebellion, desire for revenge, now you're entirely indifferent to them. Whereas before certain things brought out fear, doubt, now you're not responsive to them. It doesn't enter your mind. Whereas before certain things brought out greed or fear or selfishness or sensuality, now you just don't respond to them anymore. They're as if they weren't around even. So it is. First, learn this lesson. The human world, the people in it, are victims of every negative, diseased, sinful, poverty-stricken state of thought that operates as human consciousness. And it strikes at you wherever you're weakest. If you're fearing disease more than anything else, it's a sickness that hits you. If you fear lack more than anything else, it's a lack that hits you. If you're susceptible to a false appetite, that hits you. Whatever it is, your weakest spot, that is where it hits you. If nothing else, it'll make you fear ghosts somewhere. Now, part of our work as students is to obey the Master's injunction to come out from among them and be separate. And remember this, he didn't pray that we be taken out of the world, that we be left in the world, but not of it. You'll know when that's happening in your experience, when you are responding less to the world's impulses, to the world's fears, the world's doubts, the world's sins, the world's lacks, the world's diseases. When you have more and more immunity, when you go through life less and less aware that those things are going around, or if you're aware of them, they make no impression on you, then is when you know that you are being freed from world mesmerism and are now in the world, but not of it. Now you're of the kingdom of God. Now the still small voice can take over and direct you, lead you into green pastures beside the still waters. Now the inner spiritual impulse can do those things for you which Scripture promises, can go before you to make the crooked places straight. But you yourself must be freed of the hypnotism of this world. No one can do that for you but you. When you ask for help of a practitioner, the practitioner does it for you on that particular subject at that particular minute. But you yourself are ready. As Jesus said, sometimes you get rid of one error only to make room for 7 more to enter. And so it is that a practitioner may nullify some form of error for you, break some form of hypnotism for you, and allow you to have 7 worse ones come at you. Why? Because you have not freed yourself from the invisible influence that exists as universal hypnotism. Now, don't make the mistake of fearing this invisible influence, for it isn't a power except to those who either are ignorant of it or who give it power. It isn't a power once you realize its nature. Then it is as if you were a radio set and you could turn off any station you wanted. And so you can. At this stage of your experience, you can shut out from yourself world hypnotism. It'll take you a few months to really accomplish it, because you have to do it faithfully. You have to do it several times a day. You have to, first of all, give recognition when something says, I have a headache, to say, no, it isn't I who have the headache. That's that universal sense striking at me. Or I have a lack that I can't fill. No, it isn't I that has the lack, but I am accepting this universal sense, and so forth and so on. You know through the writings how it's done. I'm merely calling to your attention the fact that you will not only be in the world, but you'll be of it. until you break the hypnotic sense that makes you the victim for all of this silent thing that goes on. Now just think of a child who's going to learn arithmetic without study and goes to sleep at night. And the machine starts playing and it tells him that 3 times 3 are 9 and 4 times 4 are 16 and 5 times 5 are 25. And he wakes up in the morning and he has no knowledge of these things, but he says them and recites them. Think what's happened to that child. It's lost its mind. It's lost its thinking and reasoning capacity. It has only the ability now to let somebody pump something into it, and then they have to accept it because they were asleep and had no power to fight back with a conscious mind. Now, you know, that isn't knowledge. That isn't knowledge. No. There's no knowledge there. There is no knowledge without thought. There is no knowledge without reasoning. There is no knowledge without knowledge. But just to repeat what somebody drummed into you isn't. Can you imagine a generation of people walking around blah, 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 and not even knowing that what they're saying is true? Merely knowing that that was what was pumped into them, and they're pumping it out. So it is. The human race is going around declaring things that are not true. The human race goes around believing the world is square, flat. For thousands of years believing it. And it isn't true at all. For hundreds of years a medical theory is accepted, and then all of a sudden it's discovered that it was a theory and it's not a law, and it's thrown out. But all that time, people were. I remember many, many years ago, when I was a child, I don't know if I've said it to you, but others know it, that there was so much illness in our family that I decided I wanted to be a doctor and see if I couldn't help this thing. And I started, and I did have good help along the line. And one of the books that I had to study at that time was by the head of the mental department of New York State, Dr. Charles Dana. And as clearly as can be, I remember the 2 causes that he gave for most of the insanity in the state. Almost every inmate was there of the insane asylum because of 2 reasons, and both of those reasons are medically ruled out today as being superstition. I say, well, what were they there for? What difference does it make? They accepted those beliefs. They were there for them. Now, you don't have to accept limitation, whether of health or of pocketbook. You don't have to accept limitation of human relationships. You don't have to accept limitation in any form, for these limitations are merely man-made beliefs that are thrust out in the air, and we accept them. We can stand for the fact that I and the Father are one, and all that the Father hath is mine, and declare for our infinity and demonstrate it. But demonstrate it only in proportion as we can realize that we were merely victimized, not by lack, but by a universal suggestion which we ignorantly accepted. Much of this comes under the heading of what we call protective work. But it's a bad name for it, because protective work would indicate that there is some power to be protected from, and all we want to be protected from is our ignorance of our true identity, our ignorance of the source of true wisdom, so that we don't take our information second-handed because it's pumped into us from without when we're unconscious, when we're not aware of it. And most of the things we know aren't really true. As the king of Siam says, the things I'm positively sure of, I know now I'm not absolutely positive of. That's the way it is. Don't forget that. Most of the things we know aren't true at all. Most of the things we know about each other aren't true at all. Most of the things we know about the world aren't true at all. You have to get out into the world and travel it and to meet the people of the world in order to know how much blasphemy there is in the world and how much bearing false witness against our neighbor there is in the world. For people aren't at all what the world would have us believe they are. Actually, we are the temple of the living God, and we don't need too much encouragement to prove it. All we need is a little self-realization of the fact that we have been accepting what the world pumps into us silently, invisibly, and accepting as if it were fact instead of going to God for every little thing there is and letting God give us the truth about it. Right from the beginning, I have told you that when you are working for somebody, don't try to believe that you know the truth about them. Don't hesitate to turn within and say to the Father, what is the truth about this individual or this condition? And usually the answer comes back, why, this is my child, my beloved child, in whom I'm well pleased. And then you get up and say, well, then what am I sitting here treating for? What we know about each other isn't true on the whole. What we know, period, isn't true. It is what is revealed to us from within that comes with authority. And that will begin when you sufficiently come out from among them and be separate. Stop this accepting world hypnotism just because it's operating unseen. Wake up in the morning or wake up in the middle of the night and consciously realize, nothing can enter me that defileth or maketh a lie, for I and my Father are one, and I am subject only unto the law and life of God, wisdom in God, mind of God, soul of God. Let's meditate. Here, I can see in the midst of each of you that word I, the word which you declare as I. And I can see that if you realize that this I is in the midst of you, and that from it comes to you your wisdom, your direction, your guidance, your protection, your sustenance, that as you turn only to it, that you will indeed be fed.